Hi, thanks for clicking on this video. Uh, I'm someone who loves stories and looking at things in way more detail than is actually necessary. So with the release of The Acolyte on Disney Plus, I've decided to do a number of videos covering specific parts of this show for close analysis, with this video being the first one. Obviously, with the fresh release, there's plenty of Star Wars discourse at the moment, uh, but the point of these videos isn't really to give you a definitive argument of what is good or bad or how you should feel or think about it. There's plenty of YouTubers out there who can give you very definitive viewpoints on the show. That's just not really what I'm about. Rather than casting judgment, I'd like to try to understand the show, to explore it, and hopefully contribute to a healthier discourse. I believe there are many ways to view and interpret the media we consume, and that's what I'd like to bring forward. This is the first time I've created anything like this, so if you have feedback, please do let me know. But now, let's talk about that Mae and Indara fight scene. As the opening for the show, the Acolyte clearly wants to make its mark and start strong with this confrontation. The Acolyte assassin Mae, played by Amanda Sternberg, effectively walks into a crowded local and challenges Indara, portrayed by Carrie-Anne Moss, to a one-on-one duel. After Indara refuses, Mae involves civilians to force the Jedi Master's hand. The duel concludes with Mae exploiting nearby civilians, with Indara's rescue of them becoming her sacrifice. First things first, I think the choreography of this fight scene is a massive step forward for the Disney Plus shows. Where shows like Ahsoka and Kenobi struggle with clunky movement, questionable move choices, and are frequently looking messy, this scene felt significantly more controlled. Looking at this scene, I'm able to infer things about the characters and their personalities. At no point in Ahsoka, for example, was I able to really learn anything about Ahsoka through the way she fights. By contrast, this duel has plenty to say about its characters through clean, creative choreography and clear martial influence. There was solid camera work, varied framing, and exciting moments that made this fight memorable and satisfying to me. This isn't overcomplicated either. The characterization is simple but effective. Mae fights wildly. She lunges, throws things, spins, leaps, dives out of the shadows knife first, and even pulls a hostage only to throw her over a balcony. Her action reflects her aggressive personality and mirrors the generally reckless actions that we see her taking. Actions such as attacking civilians and the Jedi Master, as well as doing so in broad daylight at a crowded bar full of witnesses. We physically see the imbalance in Mae that is also represented through her dialogue and its delivery, through those opening lines with which she provokes and taunts Indara. But we see her intelligence too, her purpose. It may feel unfocused, but it is there, behind the headstrong. Her forceful provocation is successful. Throwing the hostage distracts Indara, allowing Mae an ambush and informs the decision to strike at the bartender, something we'll cover again in a bit. This equally falls in line with Mae's character, especially with the understanding that she is an acolyte, an apprentice still in the process of being moulded, still in her chrysalis. This is conveyed powerfully to the audience through a physicality that Sternberg delivers fantastically. In contrast, we see that Indara is far more composed and calculating. She's sharp, angular, and makes no unnecessary movements. Her experience shows in her choreography, as she is able to effectively predict how Mae will move and evade her attacks by inches. This controlled movement, especially early on, also makes it apparent that Indara is feeling out Mae in the fight. She keeps her eyes firmly planted on Mae with a cold expression, similar to the tone of her dismissive dialogue when the two first interact. We only see change and urgency from Indara in two scenarios: when the civilians are in danger, and when Mae's blades are thrown directly at the Jedi Master, prompting her to draw her own blade. This contributes to the sense of Indara's calculating and stoic persona, whilst emphasizing her priorities and desire, or the desire she holds, for the safety of others. In this way, Indara's choreography paints a classic Jedi figure. A great point of comparison is the way that each character traverses to the second level of the bar. Mae flings herself around, using her momentum to acrobatically fly up feet first. It's an unconventional path, complex but direct and very flashy. Indara makes practical use of the Force, and the existing staircase banister as a sort of shortcut. Her movements are fast, but rigid and stable. Both characters take intelligent and efficient action, using their surroundings to ascend quickly. As referenced before, the way in which Indara uses the Force also contributes to the development of the fight. We see Indara use the Force to support herself, to stop Mae's stabbing motion, and to catch the hostage that tumbles over the balcony. Each time, we see that Indara must prioritize her focus on her use of the Force. When Mae stabs toward Indara and is caught, she quickly tosses the blade to the other hand with a second stab. Indara doesn't block this with the Force. She's forced to grab Mae's wrist physically and catches it with little time to spare. When Mae throws the hostage down, Indara's focus on safely catching her distracts the Jedi and causes her to lose sight of Mae. Indara doesn't look for Mae again until after reaching the second level, as her focus becomes stabilising herself as she climbs. The payoff for this comes at the end of the fight, as Mae exploits this by throwing a knife at the bartender. Indara catches the knife with the Force, saving the bartender's life, but with her focus diverted, Mae strikes Indara with a throwing knife to the heart, ending the fight and Indara along with it. Each time we see Indara use the Force, we see that she can sort of only focus on doing that. Mae then makes intelligent use of this by choosing to put Indara in a situation where she can either defend herself or use the Force to protect someone else. Interestingly, the ending of this fight has actually been a major talking point amongst the audience, as some fans have taken issue with the way in which Indara dies by a knife to the heart. Generally speaking, this seems to be rooted in the idea that this death does a disservice to the lightsaber. In more recent Star Wars media, a steadily increasing number of characters have survived lightsaber stab wounds. Some fans weren't impressed that a small blade sort of succeeded where lightsabers have been failing. Personally, I'd like to put forward a different perspective to this. If you've taken issue with these stab wounds not being fatal, then surely Indara dying to what should be a very fatal wound is a positive. Additionally, to be clear, a knife to the heart is very fatal. There are arguments to be made for or against the stab wounds in other shows, but specifically for Indara and the Acolyte, this makes a lot of sense. I do think that media nowadays does tend to downplay the seriousness of a stab wound, but I promise it isn't unreasonable to believe that a pierced heart, especially whilst Indara is bleeding out, does not have a high survival rate. I don't think that this is the criticism that some maybe want it to be, but I do think it was worth bringing up. A less contentious point, but one that I do believe deserves more attention, is actually some of the dialogue in these scenes. The language choices in this scene are admittedly rather strange in places. Mae opens with this almost ritualistic challenge to Indara, stating, "Attack me with all your strength." The basic language and blunt nature mixed with the sort of palpable tension and apprehension at facing down a Jedi Master makes this dialogue feel forced and clunky. Personally, I cringed. Something succinct and simple would have done the job, and could have even been played for something like intimidation. Something as simple as, "Fight me, Jedi." Imagine a character like Jango, Boba, Cad Bane saying this, and I'm sure you can sort of picture how this would work. Just might not work as well in my voice. But now picture them saying, "Attack me with all your strength." Maybe it works, but it becomes that much more dependent on context than delivery. I'm almost willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, based on this sort of ritualistic vibe. Maybe something will pop up later that informs this, but I'm certainly not sold on it right now in this episode. It sort of feels like the first of several attempts at poetic language that fall relatively flat for me, in that they're said in what I believe is an attempt at fanciness, but that ultimately is rather shallow. After this taunt, Indara counters, claiming Jedi do not attack the unarmed. Indara is composed, entirely unbothered by both Mae's challenge as well as the laughter that's started erupting from any onlookers. They just give us tidbits of characterization through this dialogue and interaction that are definitely worth having a look at. Meanwhile, Mae is quick to anger, noticing the laughter and hissing back a venomous and aggressive reply of, "Yes, you do." Indara contrasts this with her patience and contemplation as she seemingly puzzles out the implications of what Mae is saying. This is obviously then built on as Indara is relatively slow to join the brawl. She opts to observe and then interrupts when force is required. She interrupts when it's necessary rather than just jumping headfirst in. When Indara finally does draw her saber later in the fight, Mae notes that a Jedi doesn't pull their weapon unless prepared to kill. I've seen some criticism of this line, but it seems to generally have come from a place of confusion, as the fans who've brought it up seem to have conflated it with is going to kill rather than unless prepared to kill. This line actually does seem to run a bit deeper. It acts as an acknowledgement of an idea that really comes to fruition in the prequels, that although the Jedi consider themselves peacekeepers, they're equally perpetrators of death and violence. This is then brought to an extreme when they become army generals during the Clone Wars. I don't think this is really a projection of good or bad. Instead, it's an acknowledgement of the complexities of taking this sort of action, particularly for a group like the Jedi Order who are involved in, politics, peace, religion, war. That said, the way that Mae says it implies a deep personal disgust for the Jedi. Either way, it is enough to make Indara falter and think. Indara lowers her lightsaber, which sort of signifies this. Across the whole scene, the dialogue does serve to imply a shared history between Indara and Mae, and equally between Mae and the Jedi Order at large. The way that Mae says these things is pointed and really exaggerates this effect. When the composed Indara is shaken by these words, we wonder about the shared history, and we start to wonder what's happened between these two characters. This becomes a key part of the mystery as the episode develops, and I imagine it will continue to stay that way throughout the season. Another moment worth mentioning in relation to this is shortly before this scene, when Indara unmasks Mae. Indara has a relatively subtle reaction to Mae's face, and notably the marking on her head. Indara, keeping her cards close to her chest, at least for the audience, recognizes her and confirms a prior relationship. It's unclear as to whether Indara recognizes Mae for Mae, or as Osha, though. I do think my money would be on Mae, given the tone that Indara uses when she speaks to her. This sort of subtlety is used again before the ending of the fight, in the way in which Carrie Ann Moss uses her own head movement to signify that she realizes what Mae will do after she spots the bartender. The result of this might actually be more interesting than you might have first considered, or honestly might be more interesting than I'm making it sound right now. Despite the implications that Mae has been making concerning the Jedi and their sort of role of protection, Indara uses the Force to save the bartender. This moment before the knife is thrown tells us that it's entirely likely that Indara knows what this is, a choice between saving this innocent and saving herself. Indeed, after the fact, Indara doesn't seem particularly surprised that Mae threw the knife at her. She simply looks to her in an ambiguous moment, maybe defiance, maybe still trying to compute what had happened in their shared past. Indara may have just proven Mae wrong, but also Indara had to take a chance here. Mae could still kill the bartender after Indara's death. There would be no one there to stop her. So this means that Indara chose the possibility of saving someone else's life over the certainty of saving her own. I think that says a lot about Indara's character, but it's also applicable to Mae. See, there's this interesting reflection on Mae here. We might interpret this sequence as Mae choosing to throw for the bartender because, she knew that it would give her the opportunity to strike. But if that's the case, then Mae effectively proves herself wrong about the Jedi and also highlights the conflict within herself. See, this in itself was a belief that the Jedi Master would protect the innocent over herself. It doesn't exactly align with someone who truly believes the Jedi are selfish and morally compromised. It doesn't exactly align with what Mae has been saying since the beginning of this scene. There's also an implication here that maybe Mae doesn't actually want to kill these civilians. She starts the show bribing one of them for information. There's this sort of sense that she's somewhat in touch with the average galactic citizen. The only time she truly threatens a life other than Indara's are moments where the skilled Jedi Master is there to rescue them. Of course, she's still threatening their lives here, but it's just a point that I think is worth scrutinising. And of course, this isn't a certainty, but it is an interesting possibility. And yes, Mae does threaten the bartender at the end of the fight. She's poised in front of him with her knife. But whether she would actually kill him or not is technically another question. Certainly, the child with him seems to have an effect on her, but her body language even before seeing the child might suggest something otherwise. She's defensive. She uses an arm to pick up the knife and holds it across her body in a stance that suggests warning, intimidation, and safety for herself, rather than one prepared to actually strike. I think currently, my personal interpretation would be that this is a sort of intimidation tactic, and that seeing the child didn't change her decision. I think it does give us insight to something that might be important later, this idea of a child seeing death and the potential loss of their parent, but I'm not sure that it changes her decision. This is then supported by the fact that Mae wouldn't truly benefit from killing the bartender. Some fans have pointed out that in sparing him, she leaves a witness, but there were plenty of other witnesses. The bartender has seen her face, yes, but she was hardly disguised to begin with, and I don't think it would be unreasonable to think that one of the very many people in this bar could give an accurate description of her. So this does feel relatively inconsequential. It's still open to interpretation, but again, this is something worth thinking about. So those are my thoughts on the Mae and Indara fight. There's some surprisingly strong characterization, and the scene gives us plenty to break down. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Media is always best experienced when you have peers to speak to about it. If you enjoyed this video, look out for more close analysis on other interesting parts of the Acolyte. If any other combat sequences like this are released, I might go over those, but even outside of the fight scenes, there's plenty to talk about in these episodes. Hopefully the concepts that I spoke about at the start of the video seemed present in my analysis. Again, I'm very new to the whole YouTube video thing, so please excuse any imperfections. I'm always open to advice, just let me know if you have any. Thank you very much for listening and giving this a time of day. Until next time.